Hello, everybody. I would like to welcome you to the third event in place during the conference, the third talk, and this is going to be run by Darrell Eby. A few announcements before we get started. Um, I want to remind you cameras and microphones will be disabled for attendees during the conference, but the chat works. The chat function will remain active for any questions. I've just sent everybody a message so you can easily identify me and send me a message in private through the chat, and when you want to send a question for the speaker. After 45 minutes, I will be reading some of the questions for the speaker to answer. Okay, so we will give the speaker the first 45 minutes. A few words about the speaker before he gets started. Darrell is a Canadian educator with a master's in educational management and leadership. He has 25 years of experience in bilingual education projects in 3 countries. After starting his career in British Columbia, his fondness for travel led him to Cali, Colombia, as an English teacher. In Santiago, Chile, he found a home in one of the member schools of the Association of British Schools, where he was the head of English and an IB examiner before becoming a head of school. Since 2018, Darrell has been the rector of Colegio Costa Cordillera in Antofagasta. So we want to welcome Darrell Eby with his presentation, English as a Pillar at Colegio Costa Cordillera. Welcome, Darrell, and time is all yours.
Very good. Thank you very much, Joaquin. And welcome to everyone. So let me bring this up. Excellent. Thank you for the wait. As Joaquin explained, my name is Darrell Eby, and the session I'm presenting today is English as a Pillar at Colegio Costa Cordillera. What I'm hoping to do today is actually something fairly simple. Starting off with just a little bit about my experience. Joaquin has said a few words about me. I'm going to explain a little bit about my experience, my background, and then how that connects to my experience now at Costa Cordillera in Antofagasta and the English that we're trying to develop there. From there, I want to talk about how we at Costa Cordillera are looking forward, how we're using the experience that we're going through in the last couple of years, particularly this year of 2020, and what we need to do in the future. And what I'm hoping for is that the process that we're going through right now, the experience that we have, can lead us into a conversation, because I think while perhaps our situation as a new school is a little bit unique and different, I think some of the questions that we're asking are the same questions that anyone would ask who's in English instruction. So, as I said, I wanted just to very quickly, not to repeat, but to highlight a few things that Joaquin spoke about me, so you have a better understanding of where I've come from and what my perspective is when we're talking about my experience here and in Chile over the last almost 2 decades. So I am Canadian from the west coast of Canada. And what I want to emphasize here was that my experience was very much growing up and in my first years of teaching, very much a unilingual experience. While Canada is French and English, my childhood was English only. Teaching was teaching to native speakers of English. It was a very different experience. As you said, I like to travel, ended up doing some traveling, and through everything I ended up in Colombia, where I had my first chance in 1998 to teach to non-native speakers of English, and got my first taste of some of the differences between teaching to native speakers of a language and second language users. After that, in 2001, came to Chile, to Santiago, to Redland School, which is one of the ABS schools, the Association of British Schools in Chile. Moved on to becoming the head of the English department. And since Redland is an IB school, that's where I got my first taste, my first experience with the International Baccalaureate, the IB programs, both Language B, at that time A2, and Language A, and eventually became an examiner for Language A for the IB. And in all that time, of course, coordinating as head of English, and then my last sort of 10 years at Redland as the head of the senior school, coordinating and helping direct language acquisition throughout the school. Also, I wanted to mention something about my personal life. I've got a small photo here of my 3 children. Just wanted to mention this very briefly because one of the reasons I came to South America was that unilingual experience I had growing up. In my travels, I realized that most of the world doesn't have a unilingual experience. You look at most of Europe, Asia, Africa, most people have more than one language. Perhaps South America and North America, in large portions of it, are the only places on the planet, a few others of course, that unilingual experience is common. So one of the reasons I came to South America was to have that change, to do something for myself. And then as I had a family, my 3 children were born here in Santiago, in Chile, in Santiago, and have spent their entire life in Chile. So while their first language is English, the whole experience outside of the home is in Spanish. And that's something that I didn't have growing up, and that's something that I believe that everyone in the world, our students in particular, should have that experience and that opportunity. So that was starting in 2001, and then as of last year, 2019, I took on a new challenge as the rector of Colegio Costa Cordillera here in Antofagasta. Now, it's a new school, just started in 2018, but one of the reasons I was chosen for this post was for my English language experience, the background with teaching English acquisition, and what I could bring to the school in that respect. Now, I'm going to get to Costa Cordillera in a few moments. But before that, what I was hoping to do was just to talk a little bit about the importance of English in Chile as I've seen it over the years. As educators, and this is a little bit strange, this environment that we have here. Normally I would like to ask how many people are teachers, how many people are administrators, how many people are in universities and in primary, básica, media. I don't have that opportunity, but I'm presuming most of us have some understanding, great understanding of the benefits of second language acquisition and particularly of English. As we know, we're bombarded by the power of language and what it can do for us. And not just language, but then 2 languages, what bilingualism can do for us. And if we have to choose one language, well, English seems to be a pretty good one. As it's been said, English is the 2nd language of the rest of the world. And I think there's a lot of evidence for that. And while this is really well known, including here in Chile, I think I've seen a significant change over the years in this awareness. So, and I think to a large degree, that's because while English perhaps you could say is a global language at the moment, started that way because language, the English language physically went out into the world and met people, so to speak. The growth now that we see isn't that physical, it's more virtual. It's a result of globalization, advances in communication, and virtual technology and virtual experiences, such as the one as we're having today. that means that the boundaries that we see today, there are a lot fewer boundaries and limits to English language and growth and the benefits of. And when I get to the end of this presentation, I'm also hoping to link in to our experience now this year in 2020 and how the experience of the virtual world has become even more augmented. So in Chile, I've seen that growth. I recall about, must be at least 15 years ago, having a parent come up to me and had a very, for me, what was a very strange question. She was concerned about her 3 children and about whether it was a good idea, whether there were benefits to their children to leave Chile and go and have an experience, particularly in an English-speaking country. For me at the time, and it's marked me, it stayed with me, I thought, how could someone not conceive of that? But I think that was part of the mindset at the time that I think has slowly started to change over time. And I've seen that included here in Antofagasta in the north, not just in the major centers like Santiago, but I've seen that attitude here change even in a brief period of time in Antofagasta. And I think what's happening is that parent interest is based on the idea that English is not a luxury anymore. It's not something just for a small number of people. However, it's essential. It's essential for success. It's essential for advancement, for opening up the doors, not just in Chile, but outside of Chile. And I think when we're being bombarded by articles throughout the media on the different benefits to second language, to English, whether it's things such as you want your child to have an experience outside the country at university. Well, depending on the source that you have, it could be the top 10 universities in the world are all in English-speaking countries, or 19 of the top 20, or at the very least, a significant number of the top universities in the world are in English-speaking countries. Also, we know that employers, when you look at the growth of technology and those fields, internet and fields that use internet, we know that English is the #1 language in that. And these are things that are becoming more and more common, more and more known. We have knowledge of headhunters, international headhunters, who, if they receive a CV for certain positions, and the CV, even for a job in Chile, if it doesn't have bilingual and English on it, then the CV isn't even considered. I have former students who are working here in Chile, but working for companies abroad in India and Europe, and English is the language of communication and language of work. And that has augmented. 15 years ago, that was extremely rare. Now, I think it's quite commonplace and growing. And with this, as I mentioned, there are more and more of the growth areas in the world, growth careers are in areas such as technology, the internet, programming, that the primary language is English. So when we talk about statistics, between 5 and 20%, depending on the study, of benefit to your salary if you have a second language, particularly English, and talking about benefits at the start of your career, considering how much higher on average your salary will be at the beginning of your career, how much faster you will progress, and the better positions and opportunities you have. And the bigger the company, the bigger the opportunities. So we've seen this, but it's becoming more and more common. And it goes much deeper than that. If you believe everything that you see in print, seemingly all aspects of life are affected by this, or can be affected. Second language benefits in general, a lot of evidence to talk about brain power, memory, and memory improvements. Development of third language, after a second language, a third language, and how much easier that is to learn. Studies that talk about the long-term effects of holding off dementia in old age. And then it gets into things as simple as studies show that bilingual people are nicer or they're less stressed. But more importantly, they can also it can change your worldview and how you see others, which is increasingly more important in the globalized world we have. Self-confidence and the self-concept of individuals can be improved. Nonverbal languages in both of the languages improves body language. Thinking in a non-native language is more beneficial, it makes for better rational and better financial decisions. And studies talking about creativity. One of my first experiences in Colombia, where I noticed the difference between native speakers of English and second language, was in a unit of poetry that I was teaching. In Canada, the year before, I had taught this unit, and the experience in Colombia was significantly different. What I found was, on a general whole, it was more creative. Now, I imagine there are many different factors in that, but I think my analysis is at least a significant portion of that difference was that in Canada, it was a unilingual class. In Colombia, they were all bilingual or on the way to becoming bilingual, and that affected the creativity and the use of language. So I think there's a lot of support for this, anecdotal support, as well as these studies that we see. On top of all this, there are cultural benefits, not just access to English literature, but also popular culture. As popular culture is driven, or at least significantly influenced by the English language, the cultural aspect, and we're going to make reference to that, I'm going to make reference to that in a little bit when we talk about teachers in a moment. But I think that's another important factor. Now, I'm just going to leave that for a second because, as I said, a lot of this was very much known by us, we appreciated, but since I've arrived, it's become clear that this is more and more important to Chile as a whole. It's more important to individuals. It's appreciated, English, second language, by parents, by students, but there's also some evidence in the studies and in my experience that perhaps there is something lacking on the individual level, on the effort, the conviction in learning a second language. We're still lagging behind a little bit there. As a country, it's also appreciated. We've had in Chile now for almost 2 decades, a little more than 2 decades, an English plan program. By any accounts, I think the best you could say there's been slow results. Definitely not the results that were hoped for when the program started out. And so as a school, we're asking some of the same tough questions, having some of the same decisions that we have to make now about how to move English acquisition, bilingual language forward in our school. My background and everything that I've just highlighted here has led me to this point in Costa Cordillera. As I said, it's one of the reasons why I was chosen. Now, the school was formed in 2018, and it had a very particular vision of the founders who are from Antofagasta, who felt that there was something missing, or at least there was an opportunity. There was a space in Antofagasta for a vision that had certain pillars. Among those was a healthy, active lifestyle, sport that would lead to healthy habits for life, was the sense of community, another pillar, the infrastructure in the school to present that, to give that a base, and English. But I think when the school started in 2018, before I arrived, it wasn't as clear what English should look like in Costa Cordillera. Now, I'm going to go on and explain what has happened since in Costa Cordillera in the last, well, in the 3 years, almost 3 years now that the school has been in existence. But before that, I thought I would show you a little short video, 2 minutes, about the school. As a new school, very few of you will have any knowledge or experience with the school. Perhaps you have, but for everyone, I want to give a very quick overview of what the school. Now, this is an admissions video. I'm not trying to promote anything here. However, as an admissions video, it does give a fairly well-rounded overview of the school. So I'm just going to start that up now. And I hope there won't be any problems with the connection here. Okay, let's see how this goes. There we go. Well, I hope that was fluid and it wasn't cutting in and out. But I hope that gives you an idea of the context that I'm in, at least some sort of visual representation there. So, as I mentioned, 2018 was the first year of the school. Now, if you've never had the experience of starting a school from zero, I think it's an incredible experience. I wasn't here for the first year, but I've heard all the stories. All the problems and obstacles that you would expect in general, all of that happened and much more. Now, for English in that first year, I think there were 2 things that came out of that. The importance of English to the families that were entering the school. As it was new school, all the families in that year were new. It was a new community. And what was coming out that year was a lot of families had chosen the school because for amongst the reasons, one of them was their hope for a higher level of English. The second was the board's vision on that. While the board had a very general view of what English should be important, they didn't have experience in that. That's why I was brought in to give a new direction to English. So in 2019, my first year and the first year of our current English coordinator, we were tasked with making English this pillar of of our school. And the first step in that was, while we were in the process of analyzing our situation, we still had to move the school forward, the English instruction in the school forward. So we had to align the school, we had to develop the policies from pre-playgroup right to, at that point, that was third medio last year. And as we were doing that, we had to determine what was our reality so we could take better and more informed decisions about the direction that we wanted to go in the future and how we were going to teach English. We started investigating and started asking some of those big questions. Same questions that people do everywhere, but we were more in that infancy stage, still are, so we're asking them a little bit more overtly. The biggest question that we had was, what is the goal that we want for our students? What is the profile of a student leaving Costa Cordillera at the end of his or her time in the school? We're still developing that concept, that profile, but we have a much better idea of what it is. But it's been slow. It's been slow because in the reality, when we first got to Costa Cordillera, when I arrived here, and the year before, when students arrived, as I mentioned, everyone was new. So the previous experiences were different. Students coming from public schools, students coming from schools that had a focus in English, students coming from bilingual schools, or no English at all. And that led to, in addition, I should mention, each year after that, in the first year we had about 500 students. So you imagine 500 students, different levels of English, and how you're going to, in any class, when you have such a wide range of abilities in any year group, wide range of expectations that have to be discovered and addressed, the baggage from previous schools and previous experiences with English that were the result of what happened in your school, but you now have to accept and deal with those. And then every year, while we had 500 students in the first year, we had about 150 students new in 2019. And then to start this year, there were an additional almost 200 students new to the school. So rather than stabilizing, all of these factors have only augmented and made our job a little bit more complicated. In addition, we have to look at, as a new school, with all these complications and obstacles, what is our goal for a student, for example, in second media, in grade 10, 15, 16, 17 years old, who is about to leave in 1 or 2 years, and what can we do for that student in a short period of time when there's such a range of experiences with English? And then what we want to do with the youngest learners in play school, playgroup, pre-kinder, kinder, basica, when we have more time to develop their English and bring them up to what we could then say is a result of Costa Cordillera. Now with that as well, we have the questions of bilingualism. We are not a bilingual school. We don't say we are, but we may go down that road at some point in the future. At this point, we're not bilingual, we're not intensive, we're something else. We're still trying to define that. While we're defining that, we have to keep moving forward our English so we are doing something productive in the class and we are better prepared to then make those decisions and take our students with us. For that reason, we have a national program at present, gives us a lot of flexibility because the national program starts at a level and we have flexibility to go as high above that as we're able to, depending on the class and the level that we have. Although we are looking at, and have talked about at one point or the other, and will continue, different curriculums such as the IB, IGCSE, Cambridge Primary Program, International Primary Curriculum, ACTFL, and different ones such as that. But while we're doing that, we've also got factors about our teachers. As we're starting out, we're in that discussion, particularly at level with board, for example. What is better, a native speaker of English or a Chilean second language speaker? Native speakers have that benefit of having that cultural knowledge. They have the level, perhaps even some of the innovation, simply taking in things from other countries, from outside of our borders. But on the other side, there's the cost, the instability, and particularly here in the north, in regions, when you're not in a major center like Santiago, there's questions about availability of teachers who are native speakers. Chilean teachers, on the other hand, much more stable. They're more likely to stick around because this is their home. They have that firsthand experience that I think is so valuable, firsthand experience learning a second language, that not all English native speakers, such as myself with a unilingual experience, don't have that experience, or I didn't have it as a child. I've only had that recently, that experience of learning a second language. And then also some of the questions about culture and what a Chilean teacher who hasn't been abroad, and how there's a lack of teachers who have gone abroad, Chilean teachers who've gone abroad, to have that cultural experience, to be able to give a more authentic experience in the classroom. Additionally, the expectations of the community. It's just simply seen by parents. If there's a native speaker, there's more confidence in a native speaker rather than a Chilean speaking English, independent of the fact that some of the best teachers of English that I've come across in the 20 years in Chile are in fact Chilean, native Chileans, second language of English. Additional factor with teachers is teacher qualification. The system that we have here in Chile of preparing teachers, well, there can be some very good teachers that come out of the program when the standards in the public school, and for most are much lower, the expectations are lower. Then when you're trying to develop a bilingual program, I think there's also a scarcity of that type of teacher. I know there's a lot of work going on in the universities with teacher training in English, but there are a lot of obstacles there, and that's a whole other session. The move from Santiago to Antofagasta, one of my concerns was that with teachers. Now, I was very pleasantly surprised about the level of the teachers in Antofagasta. However, it's true, it's a smaller center, so there are fewer people to choose from. And then when you get into aspects like English in other subject areas, it becomes even more prominent in the north or in the regions of Chile that there isn't a lot of access to those teachers, and therefore costs start going up and limit the feasibility of certain programs for a school. So, to close that sort of section, there is a lot of interest in Chile. There's a lot of slow results, however, and in starting a new school, it's been able to give me an opportunity to reflect a little bit on some of these obstacles that are there when thinking about the program that you have in your school and what you can do with that for language instruction. So, that was the situation up until October of last year. And after a good part of our year, 2 trimesters, we had a very decent idea of what our reality was in Costa Cordillera, where we wanted to go, what we wanted to do. And then October 2019 hit, and the social movement that happened and the disruption that caused. And then, of course, 2020, this year, with COVID starting in March, all of our plans, all of our ideas for where we wanted to be at this point, well, were thrown out the window. We haven't advanced as much as I wanted to solve this riddle of exactly what is the best way to teach English for our community. Since we've been thrown off course, I think there's a silver lining here. There's a chance for us to stop, take a look at things, and reflect on what has been happening, particularly in the past few months of this year. And if that's true for us, particularly at this moment as we're trying to define these things, I also think it's an opportunity for any school to take a chance to look at our practices and the innovation that has been happening and how that can affect future English instruction in our schools. So let me just go back to the presentation here. Here we go. The experience this year, I think, is quite significant. The pandemic that we're experiencing and the need that we've had to, I think every school has had this need to innovate, change the format, change how we're teaching, and it's been a great opportunity if you look at it from that perspective. We've all had to change to, in some form or another, to some degree, education at a distance. And this has meant the use of technology. When we talked about the English spreading through virtual forms and the use of technology, well, we've all seen that in the last few months since March. Now, there's been some good examples of global language teaching that's been very innovative at the level of universities and in businesses for adults. But I think in general, it's safe to say in Chile, at least, in schools, we have been very slow to redefine and take advantage of some of these, or at least fully take advantage of some of the possibilities that exist. There's a lot of barriers there. We are notoriously slow in education to change. It takes a lot of effort to change the mindsets of teachers who have had one way of doing things, who have been taught that way and have used that way their entire life. Students and parents who have certain expectations, and that hasn't changed all of their life. And for boards and everything else to go on a limb and try something new as well, I think there's a lot of mindsets there that are difficult to change. But I think recently those barriers, some of those barriers have been broken. If you look at simply technology, how many of you would have thought that this type of conference, you would be attending this type of conference a year ago? Our teachers, you could ask the same question. How many of them thought they would be giving virtual classes regularly in such a short period of time? If you tried to implement that in a normal school setting, it would take years. Now, we probably do it a lot better than being forced into it in a short period of time, but it's happened. And after several months, it's happening quite well. And some very surprising things are happening. Some very good things are happening. Now, with that comes the question of connectivity. Access to computers, access to smartphones, to internet. And we're also at a key point in time right now. If you think about this, even a couple of years ago, had we had this experience, it would be much more difficult. The obstacles that we face now would be tenfold, even 2 years ago. And I think in 2 years' time, there will be even fewer obstacles. We're going in that direction, so we need to think about that. Think about the resources that we have at our fingertips now. Virtual field trips. Some of the things that I've seen in the last few months, field trips to aquariums that don't require permission slips, don't require funding, don't require a bus. And if you live in the north, they don't require, well, simply they're not available because you're not in a major center. Visits by experts, native speakers to address that cultural aspect. If you have, as I've seen, astronomy lessons from someone in Australia, I think that can be very powerful and can be a lot more effective, regardless of what happens in 2021. There's familiarity on both sides, students and the guests. As we've seen here, we're all used to it now to have this type of interaction, and that's around the world. If you want experience from Canada or the States or England or Australia, most people there have had some sort of experience like this and are much more willing to do it. Students are willing to accept this. It's something for us to think about when we're dealing with cultural issues and wanting to bring that into classroom.
Darrell?
Yes.
5 minutes left.
5 minutes. Perfect.
5 minutes.
I think we're doing well. Okay. So you've got those possibilities and opportunities. Parents, to include parents into a classroom when they don't have to leave work and take 2 hours off work to come into the school, but they can simply in their office take 15 minutes out and connect to a classroom. Those are things that perhaps can be more useful in the future. It's a real world context that can really help us, particularly in the regions that we don't have so much access to so many opportunities. Authentic learning can happen. I've seen cooking classes where we can't have cooking classes because of health regulations in our school, but I just saw a class where in English where they went through a recipe and they made pancakes for everyone, and then everyone at their own homes made pancakes for their family. Those sorts of experiences, I think, gives us something to reflect on and think about. That's a very rich experience for someone who's in second grade. Digital textbooks and digital libraries are things that have been difficult to look at up until now, but it's something that I think we need to look at and be aware of, because people are more willing to think about these options. Teaching practices, how we observe classes when we have these possibilities. Sharing experience with other teachers, with parents, just being able to share a parent when their child is presenting in a classroom. Head of department going in easier, being able to record and flexible form of seeing what's going on in classrooms. Involving parents in the process, especially of the youngest students in the process. And this has opened up another aspect that we're now debating in Costa Cordillera about the use of first language in the classroom. If it's appropriate, when it's appropriate, especially with the youngest learners, especially when it's the parent right beside them in front of the screen and the parent does not have English. So these are discussions that I think we need to investigate and dig deeper into. It opens up that whole discussion. And then aspects such as for any school, any subject, but also for English, how do you keep continuity going when there's absences? Whether it's an individual who's absent because they can't come into school, they're injured, for example, or if there's a class trip and half the students are in Santiago in a different center and you want them to keep on, have a continuity of their English lessons. These are things that we need to look at, so that when we look at the uncertainty that may be 2021, we can reflect on the lessons that we've learned now, the decisions that we've made now, the directions that we're heading now, and how that might impact whatever our situation is in 2021. Whether that is some sort of blended experience, whether we are back in brick and mortar experience, but even if it's that brick and mortar, there could very well be times and moments when, because of an outbreak, because of someone who has come down with it, that there's a group that has to leave the school and we need to return to this experience. So that is my big question now. So big question that we're reflecting on, we're thinking about. I go back to a quote that, one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite people, Albert Einstein, insanity being doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Now, maybe we're not talking about insanity here, but if we're slow as in education to change, and it takes a lot of time to make significant change happen, and we know that we want our English acquisition to move forward and to do it faster, well, perhaps the experience that we have right now, what we're reflecting on in Costa Cordillera, because we are in our infancy, perhaps this is a time for us to do something different and therefore get different results, get better results. And some of the things that have been negatives in the past have been obstacles. Perhaps we can use those to our advantage. So in Costa Cordillera now and for the future, we're asking, where do we go from here? What can we learn from the innovation? How can we use this to develop our program in Antofagasta. Now, what I'm hoping for, we've got time now for some questions, and I'm happy to answer questions, but I also think it's an opportunity for simply a conversation. What are some of the other practices and experiences that you've seen in your school that have made you think, made you go, and pause and wonder, oh, this is something that we don't want to lose when things go back to normal, whatever normal is. When we go back next year, when we go back to classes, whenever we do go back to classes, how can we be better at what we do? I hope this has been helpful or at least informative, or has given some insight, a moment of reflection. And if it has, then that's all I can ask for. And thank you very much. Okay.
All right. Yeah, thank you very much for your insights on how you are doing it up in the north. I've got 3 questions here. I think we have enough time to answer them. Number 1, in your experience, considering cultural background and family attitude and the whole context, what 2 advantages and or disadvantages could you identify as far as bilingual education goes when comparing Santiago and the north of Chile, specifically Antofagasta?
Sorry, could you repeat the first part of that again?
Yeah, in your experience, considering cultural background, I assume this refers to both Santiago and Antofagasta, considering cultural background, family attitude, and the whole context, the whole cultural context. Students have to, be in or are immersed in when receiving bilingual education. Could you identify 2 advantages and or disadvantages? Is it the same? In other words, I assume this person is asking, is it the same to educate or to do bilingual education, to run a bilingual education program in Santiago as compared to Antofagasta? 2 advantages or disadvantages? Because you have worked in both systems,
Yes.
in both cities. So what 2 advantages would you be able to identify?
My first reaction, there were 2 things that initially popped up. As I said, I spent 18 years in Santiago, know that quite well, but I did travel quite a bit throughout Chile. So, and my experience through travel is you can't judge a country by the major city. Canada is not Toronto by any means. Chile isn't Santiago by any means. There are these differences. So coming to Antofagasta, I was watching for, expecting, trying to determine what are the differences, because I didn't want to make any assumptions about the experience here. And for that reason, I've got a very good, capable team in my senior leadership here at the school who are from Antofagasta or have more experience in Antofagasta and can help me understand some of the differences. Now, first of all, I think there are some difficulties, as I've addressed a little bit in the presentation. Some of those difficulties are with access to resources, whether it's teachers or materials. We deal with some of the same people, but where in Santiago, I could go down to Books and Bits and have someone come up to the school. It's a lot more complicated to have that here. There are fewer resources, or it's more complicated to get those resources. And that includes teachers for all the reasons that I've mentioned. However, I think there's another side. And when I talked about some of that resistance in Santiago years ago to opening up, I think one of the things that I've experienced is Chile is fairly unique in that there's one central hub in the country, and that's for everything, including education. Everything is focused in Santiago, and people come into Santiago, but they tend not to leave Santiago. When I left Santiago, there was a lot of surprise. Why would you leave Santiago and go to Antofagasta? It's not in people's mindsets in this country to leave and to go out. And that affects teachers leaving, trying to get teachers to come to the north or to the south, I would imagine. And I do think there is some aspect of that in Chilean culture. Now, I think the reverse is also true. One of the things I've been very pleasantly surprised with, or maybe not surprised, but I've been pleased with, is in the north, there is a lot more movement than I would see in Santiago. Santiago, if you're in Santiago, you don't leave. You come in and then you stay. However, in the north, there's a lot more movement. So you get people who will go to Santiago. A lot of our teachers have gone to Santiago, been trained, had years of experience there, and then have come back home to where their friends and family are. And I think what I've seen so far in a very short period of time here is I've seen a little bit more of that openness to our families as well. So I think there's more openness, more expectation of learning English, because for the population that we have, there's more expectations, more hope that they will go to Santiago, their children will go to Santiago, will go to other countries and have different experiences. Even compared to, for example, Redland. I think there's a stronger sense there, which gives us more conviction to make sure we do our English program properly in Costa Cordillera. I hope that at least answers some of that question.
Yep. Okay. And then question number 2, you originally come from a fairly bilingual country, Canada. So apparently this question is aiming at that. What 2 pieces of advice would you borrow from your experience back in Canada for our local authorities and the community in general, the Chilean culture?
Oh, that's a good one. I'm not sure how qualified I am to answer that, however. As I said, my experience was very unilingual. I was born in a little town, 15,000 people on the northwest coast of Canada, and you were much more likely to hear Vietnamese or Portuguese, Italian, than you would French. Canada officially isn't a bilingual country. It's a country with 2 official languages. So that means, and as a large country as well, then you get a lot of separation. My experience, as opposed to my wife, for example, who went to a French-speaking university, was a French teacher in Canada, has much more of an experience and understanding of how that works. My part of Canada, the closest French community was several thousand kilometers away. So there wasn't that. My experience, therefore, would be that separation that exists and how difficult it is when it's not a real world experience. For me, to learn French, my worst subject in school was French. In grade 11, I almost failed French because there was no, it wasn't a real subject to me. There wasn't a purpose to it. When we can make language that real purpose, when we can open up our borders and accept, not just on a superficial level, playing video games and watching movies, but when we really understand that a second language, any second language, and because there's a lot of evidence that says languages like Hindi and Mandarin Chinese and other languages could just be, depending on what your area is and where you want to go, could be as helpful or more helpful, depending on the area, in your future. But I think in Chile, we're still somewhat isolated. We have that mindset that we need to break out of, that we're isolated. Chile is an island, it's been explained to me. The Andes on one side, the Pacific on the other, the Atacama in the north, and the Antarctica in the south. We need to open that up in deeper ways. And that starts, I think, in the classroom, can start in the classroom, and find better ways of having authentic learning and experiences for our students. And therefore, these virtual experiences that we can have now, the learning that has happened in the past 4, 5, 6 months, is something that I think we can't just let slide and disappear.
Okay, and we have time for one more question, and this will be what Fernanda is asking. She says, I would like to ask Darrell, how did Costa Cordillera involve the use of technology before social outbreak and the coronavirus?
How? Lots of trial and error. It was a process. And when we talk about change and significant change, there's a right way to do change and there's a wrong way to do change. This was the wrong way to do it. We didn't have an option, and every school was in the same situation. Most schools, I think, were in the same situation. Very few had started to think about this. When you think about the situation in Chile last year, I think it's a very different situation than this year as far as how we present our classes. Last year, we were looking at interruptions to classes, relatively short periods of time, maybe a day or two, maybe slightly longer, but at no point were we thinking about months and months. And if we had that knowledge and awareness, we would do things much differently, but we didn't. Most schools didn't have this. Schools by nature, we are brick and mortar institutions. We do our teaching in a classroom. Sometimes we'll venture out, we will have small experiences, but those are exceptions. Very few schools, for very good reasons, don't do that, particularly with younger students, because we need that physical contact, that face-to-face. It's very difficult behind a screen all day long when you are 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. It's more feasible with the older students, but it's still difficult. So the process that we had to go through was very much trial and error. We have some people who are very much more advanced in technology and use of things like Google Classroom, Zoom, different platforms that we do use, and we just had to implement these very slowly, bit by bit, and reflect on what we were doing. Lots of training came into that. When we had, in April, when we had the mandatory vacation period, our students were off, our teachers had a bit of a chance to rest, but every day we had training. Every day that in those weeks, we had training for our teachers to help get them more up to date with what we are doing, so everyone could do what we are doing now. So I hope that, I know that might be slightly of a waffle of a question. There isn't a solid answer to that because it was very much unplanned. And
right.
How I would want to do it if I could plan it.
I think you've answered the question. Unfortunately, we don't have any more time left for any further questions, but we want to thank you again for sharing today. We were having Darrell Eby from Costa Cordillera in Antofagasta. So thank you again. Thanks again for participating today, Darrell. And we want to remind everybody that we still have one more session to go, and they are letting me know already that that session is opening up in a few minutes, okay? We have a few minutes for a recess, so just get ready, stretch out a little bit, go get some water, because we still need energy to finish into our last session of the day. This is a different, it's an event or a conference of a different nature. This will be a panel of experts. So get ready to meet Mauricio Vélez from Universidad de Talca, Gonzalo Eizaguirre from Concepción, Instituto Humanidades, and Anjanet Martin from Universidad de los Andes, all right? So we'll meet again, that is starting at 5:30. So thanks again for joining this session. Thank you, Darrell, once again.
It was my pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.